Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual tech talk today. Thank you for attending. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to say if you have any questions at all as he's talking, please just message in chat and Whitney will get them sent over and we will address those at the end of the talk. So please bring those up if you do have questions, though. So without much further ado, I do want to introduce Dale Meredith. He's a security expert, a Pluralsight author, and really likes to go by Mr. Wayne, so he probably doesn't appreciate me using his real name. Many of you are probably familiar with him from some of the content I've advertised from Pluralsight from him on internal communications, but maybe you've seen other stuff from him on the internet as well. So with that, this is Dale. Right there, I think. Yeah, there we go. I pointed the right direction.
Thanks, Andy, for the introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Great opportunity, or I love coming out. I was out at Cerner, man, like 3 years ago, I think. That's when I first met Andy and a lot of your teams. Really appreciate you guys inviting me back. And I'm excited about today and about the things we're going to talk about. I guess maybe to give you some a little bit of background about myself. First of all, I do list all my social connections for the Twitterverse and Instagram and my own YouTube channel as well as my own website. Outside of what I do for security, I try to make sure that individuals, families are safe while online. So that's kind of my passion. But today I actually wanted to talk to you about why secure development is so imperative in our environments today. Excuse me. Now, as far as who am I? I've been a Microsoft trainer since about 1998. Yes, we did have operating systems back then. I also was or became a certified ethical hacker as well as a certified EC Council instructor back in 2003. And at the same time, I had my own wireless ISP. I'm actually north of Salt Lake City in a really small community called Syracuse, and we didn't have high-speed internet out here. So I started my own. I dumped like 2 T1 lines into my garage, turned my garage over to turned it into a server room and office, and did wireless internet for people. Back in the day when our high-speed internet was 512K. Yeah. That was the Pro Edition. But I actually learned quite a bit about security because one of my customers, a good friend of mine, his name is Mark Burnett. No, not the Survivor producer, but he's a white hat from Microsoft, and he and I came out with a trade out, and that was I would give him free internet access, and he would help me secure my network and taught me quite a bit. That's where I kind of got the interest for security. Since then, I've been involved with several projects, including projects for Homeland Security, several other government agencies, and you all know the drill. I could tell you about them, but then I'd have to. Yeah, exactly. I've also done trainings for corporate 500 companies and universities. But, my father once told me that if you want to judge a man as far as his character, you need to know who his friends are. And, yeah, I'm just saying. Me and Chuck, we go back. We're like this. And look at that smile on his face. He's so happy to be standing next to me. Matter of fact, that was back in the day when I lived in Shawnee Mission, not too far down the street from you folks. I went to Shawnee Mission Northwest High School there, back with Mr. Parker was my drama teacher for you locals. I understand he's passed away and there's like an auditorium there. But anyway, sorry, I digress. As far as my knowledge is concerned, as Andy mentioned, I've done several Pluralsight courses. I'm actually up to about 35 now. They're all within the security realm or the security domain. And if you've listened to any of my courses, you know that my jokes aren't that great. And Andy can attest to that. And he probably gets sick and tired of my references to Batman. I'm a huge, huge Batman fan. Have been since I was a little kid. In fact, I got to meet Burt Ward when I was a little kid. And that, for you youngins, that's Robin from the original 1960s show. And a lot of times people ask me, why do I love Batman so much? Not that I don't like other superheroes, but there's a reason why. And I usually ask the audience, why do you think I like Batman? Excuse me. And I'm sorry, what'd you say? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's one of the reasons. So this is so weird doing this virtually instead of a live crowd. Actually, one of the best responses I ever heard, and it actually got me to laugh quite hard. I asked the question, why do you think I love Batman so much? And somebody in the crowd mentioned, because you saw your parents murdered in an alley. And I was like, yeah, thanks for the memories. No, it's because he has no superpower. He's a normal guy who just uses his brain. And so if you want to talk about Batman, when you reach out to me on email or social media, we can definitely talk about Batman. We can talk about this Batman. We can talk about this Batman. We can even talk about, see, there's Burt Ward, there's Robin. We can talk about that Batman. But the Batmans we don't talk about include this one. And we definitely don't talk about BatFlux, is what I like to call it. I know some of you are like, but Dale, what about the latest Batman? And I say no, because this looks too much like another character that I'm familiar with. So, yeah. Anyway, let's get into the content itself. Let's talk about actually why web apps are such a high target for us as far as an attacker. Now, I need to preference this talk in the aspect of I ain't no developer. I know what I need to look for. I'm a red team guy. I'm an attacker. I'm going to come at you. So if you have questions about code, I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer those for you. But that's why we have great teams, and you should always use people that know more than you or know the information that you don't know to work together to create a great security team. So I do want to talk about why. And here's one of the reasons why these apps are so popular for us. It's because these apps have a tendency of working or interacting with large numbers of people, sometimes internally, or most of the time internally, but sometimes also externally. And because of that footprint that's out there, the accessibility leads to what we refer to as manipulating the components that are involved with everything that's going on in the back end, right? One of the biggest issues that we have is or that it creates the security issues for us is the common languages and support. Now, web apps themselves, they communicate in a common language that needs to be compatible with HTTP or HTTPS protocol. And the browsers and that the users use are going to interact with these websites. Now, most apps, even though they run on a framework like Angular or Ruby on Rails or Python, they're still going to incorporate HTML and JavaScript code. In addition, most apps require the ability to read from and write to a database. And SQL is probably the most common query language that's out there that enables this functionality. And when you add all these components together, you have a tendency of seeing or encountering familiar and repeated vulnerabilities. And in general, those vulnerabilities include the things we're going to talk about today. One of them is weak security configurations. We'll also talk about various code injection techniques. We'll even touch on a little bit of Crosssite script attacks or XSS. And then we'll also sum this up with looking at some weak coding practices. Okay, let's jump in and take a look at our weak security configurations. Excuse me. When it comes to these weak security configurations, some of the issues are caused by, one, using poor or weak configurations. We need to avoid those. Using old or non-standard features, we should actually disable those and replace them with the current standard compliant security settings. This also is going to require, or could require, I should say, updating equipment or updating firmware or electing for a more robust configuration that might block older systems from being able to gain access. Let me give you an example. I was once doing an engagement where we were told all the systems were up to date and patched, and we happened to find an XP machine running. I know. Matter of fact, here, I'll date this one for you. At the time, Windows 8 was the latest and greatest operating system, and they were running XP. And we went in and asked them, we said, why is this XP machine there? It hasn't been patched in years. And the comment was, well, it's a system that we use to monitor the inbound and outbound sales calls for the salesman. It tracked their timing, how long they were on the call with an individual when the person called back. And of course, I asked them, I said, so why don't you guys update the software? And they were like, well, the developer no longer is around. We can't get a hold of him anymore. Why don't you find a different solution? It's too expensive. Yeah, you know what else is really expensive? Handling a breach. So again, this is one of the problems that we have. The other issue too, sometimes it pops up on us, is the troubleshooting the weaknesses of these security configurations. We should actually be doing this on a regular basis. Every IT device should be evaluated as to its current and the preferred configuration state. IT administrators should actually go through and review, because we're always updating baseline security recommendations, as well as looking at new vulnerabilities that may be coming out and making sure that we've patched those. Now, we also need to keep in mind, this is one of my favorite statements, and that is the default settings are not secure settings. So trust me, if you're using default settings in any component or device, you're asking for trouble. Okay, let's take a look at some actual better examples, at least in my experience. Web servers and applications that have been misconfigured are it's happening a lot more common, or it happens more often than you would think. And that's probably because there's no shortage of ways to kind of goof things up. For example, I've seen things like where people are rolling their own encryption. And I'm like, why don't we just use the standard encryption technology that's out there? We shouldn't be doing this because we're not encryption experts. We haven't tested or vetted the encryption in a global way. Trust me. I mean, think about the encryption. All the encryption methods that I know of, up until the latest ones, they've all been cracked or hacked. So again, if you've got this great encryption method or technology, it has been tested. We'll also have the issue of running these legacy components or content, things like WordPress plugins or old PHP MyAdmin components. We need to make sure that we keep these up to date. Even my WordPress website, for my Dale Dumbs It Down, I get updates all the time telling me all these malicious attacks are hitting. Oh, excuse me, had too much Diet Coke before we started. So we just need to make sure that we stop using these legacy content. Always update, always update. We also need to make sure that the application isn't running with debugging enabled in production. And believe it or not, we see this quite a bit. Again, debugging opens up a lot of information for an attacker. Here's another one here for you too, having the directory listing enabled on the server. We'll talk about that. This could actually leak valuable information as well as create an attack vector for people like me or people that are more evil to gain access to your systems. And then whenever we do any type of installation, remember the default settings aren't the secure settings. This really goes to the aspect of unnecessary services running on a machine. You know, when we deploy a new system or a new application, do we really need all the features that it came with? If we go off and buy a component, we incorporate it into our application. Have we reviewed all the services that are running? A lot of times we're going to find that, at least, again, my experience, we find services that are running that they didn't know about, the developer didn't know about, or somebody didn't know about, and it has a known vulnerability, and we're able to get in. Okay, here's some more. Also leaving or using those default keys and passwords. And this happens a lot more than you think. Some of you may be going, oh, come on, Dale. Trust me. Matter of fact, it's kind of interesting in the news, whenever a breach happens, it usually happens for a couple of different reasons. Either the system hasn't been patched or somebody got in with default creds, which is kind of a problem for us. We also have the issue of revealing error handling information to attackers. Things like stack traces, or matter of fact, the error messages themselves with an SQL injection. I purposely throw an attack or a component at your SQL server on the back end to see the error message. I want to see the error message because the error message can, if not configured correctly, show me things like the name of the table or the name of the entry in that table. It's really kind of scary. Now, we also have the issue here as far as unprotected files and folders that we haven't gone back and looked at. I know a lot of things happen in the development process. There's got to be a huge checklist that we go through when we go to production, because again, typically we're going to see things that have been overlooked, and this is one of them. As well as I told you before, patching. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. Again, you go back and look at breaches. What was it with? The credit bureau a couple of years ago. Was it Trans World? Anyway, their breach where they got everybody's credit information was caused because they had not patched their systems to the latest and greatest updates. So again, make sure we do. And it's not just for me. It's not just patching applications. I'm patching operating systems. I'm patching hardware devices. When was the last time we patched the router? When was the last time we patched the switch? Did we do any updates on it? What's the firmware like? Another issue that pops up all the time for us is allowing for client-side processing. This actually creates problems because we're accepting and sending information that could execute a command on our platform. And then there's also the issue of folks not securing values, using secure values, I should say, on APIs and their frameworks. Now, some of the preventions that we have out there for tightening some of this stuff down, you need to make sure that you have a good and hopefully an automated build and deploy process that can run tests on deployment. If you're using a cloud infrastructure, but there's some best practices out there, tools that you can use. There's a tool, Microsoft Azure Advisor, that's out there that you can use if you're using Advisor. I haven't done any research on the Google yet, so but I know there's some third-party tools out there like Evident that can actually help you scan your configurations for best practices or security best practices, I should say. And then we want to automate security tests. There's actually a great little program that's out there. It's called Gauntlet. It's free. We all like free, right? I should say it's open source. How's that? We can use this particular tool to create and run automated security tests, just like we would if a pen test team came in. And it's a great framework. You can add additional tests to it, and it just quickly runs, tells you what would happen if Nmap hit this particular app. It's really kind of, again, that's called Gauntlet. Okay, so let's talk about one of the attack vectors that we love going for, or misconfigurations that we love going for. Security misconfigurations can enable multiple exploits, and one of these exploits we refer to as directory transversal. Now, another one of my favorites, well, you know what, let me finish with this one, sorry. This basically is the ability to access a file from a location that you're not authorized to access. And we do this by tricking the web app to backtrack through a directory path so that the app actually can read or possibly execute a file in the parent directory. Now, how we typically do this is we'll just issue a .. or .. command to the application, maybe within an input field, and see what happens. Or excuse me, in the URL. Now, if the application is vulnerable to this type of an attack, it'll actually go up a parent directory each time I issue a .. or .. Now, imagine if I was able to transverse up to the root of the server. Yeah, then I can basically kind of go anywhere. Now, typically, when it comes to directory transversal, this only works if the app is improperly configured to access the parent folders. So, as far as properly configure the web servers to stop this, we're normally going to use filters to filter out untrusted inputs, like the directory whoa, sorry, went the wrong way on my slides. Come on. There we go. We're going to use a filter to handle the input of the .. but there's a way that attackers can actually bypass that filter. and that is by encoding the characters in hexadecimal. So in this case here, the ... backslash in hexadecimal is %2e, that's the ... and then %2f. So this is what my input would look like. So you can see here, I'm actually saying I'd like to back up 2 parent directories, and on a double IS box, that would take me out to the root directory. And then I'd like to execute inside of the Windows directory, system32, the command.exe file. Oh, and then the fun begins. Now I know what you're saying. You're saying, Dale, we could just block those. That's cool. But what if I double encode? Double encode. Sorry, I'm having a ADD moment to Animal House and secret double probation. Double encode means that we encode the %2e. And if I double encode that, or the %2e, then the %2e turns into %252e. Yeah, and I'm still able to gain access, or I can gain access if it's been misconfigured. Now, there's another one that we can deal with. It's called the poison null byte. Now, this particular parameter here we can use to terminate a character to exploit a web app that doesn't properly handle null terminators. In hexadecimal, we just add a %00. So let's say, for example, that I've got a web app here that enables users to retrieve any file that's in the var www directory. And it has to have a PHP. So I can only grab PHP extensions, nothing else, right? So even if I transverse to the file system and break out of the initial directory, I still may not be able to access that specific file because it doesn't end, or in this case, a password file because it doesn't end with PHP. But if I use this parameter at the end, just the %00, it indicates to the web app to drop the PHP extension that it's expecting. And it enables us on a Linux box or Unix box to grab a password file, which would allow me to then enumerate users that are on that box. DL, how do see? I have to do my voices. If you follow my courses, you know I have my voice. And no, I never thought it was going to sound like Kermit the Frog, so I apologize. You may be saying, DL, but how do we prevent this? Stop laughing. I know some of you are laughing. Kermit's cool. That's what I'm going to go with. So how do we prevent directory transversal attacks? Well, the most effective way for us to prevent this is to avoid passing user-supplied input to file system APIs altogether. Now, many application functions that do this can be written to deliver the same behavior, just in a safer way. So if it's considered unavoidable to pass user-supplied input to file system APIs, then we should look at a 2-layer based defense that would actually prevent these type of attacks. When it comes to the 2-layer defense, the application should validate the user input before it's processed. And this validation should compare it against a whitelist of permitted values. Don't ever use blacklists. Use whitelists, what we allow. And if that's not possible for the required functionality, then the validation should verify that the input contains only permitted content, such as our alphanumeric characters. Okey-doke. So let's now talk about some various code injection. Oh, cool, Dale. Now, I know we all know about little Bobby Tables. It's an SQL joke if you know anything about it in this particular cartoon. For those of you who don't know about little Bobby Tables, principal's called up, said they're having problems. Mother says, what happened? And they said, did you really name your son Robert? In the code here, drop table students, semicolon, whack, whack, or dash, dash. And yes, we call them little Bobby Tables. That particular code in SQL, if you type that in, if the field, or I should say the database was vulnerable to it, it actually drops all the tables in the database. And that's why it's a funny meme there. But I don't want to talk too much about SQL injection because it's so popular. And it really does depend on the version of SQL and the type of links that you have going back and forth. So I do want to talk about the aspect of the input, because most of the stuff that we do from the attacker's perspective, I'm doing it from your input fields. Again, this is typically. So anything that our application receives from an untrusted source has to be filtered. Okay. So let's talk about the code injection first. This is just called code injection. You're not introducing, when we do code injection itself, we're not actually introducing any type of runtime environment for the server to execute. You're going to be restricted to whatever language the underlying web app understands. So again, like what we're doing here with code injection, we're just adding to the application's execution, not creating a new execution. Now, a similar concept is command injection. In command injection, we actually supply malicious input to the web server, which then passes the input to the system shell for execution. And if we're able to do that, I'm actually able to get the web app to leverage languages that it's not known. Like, for example, I could actually, or it doesn't directly support, like I could get it to maybe run a bash script if I wanted to. So let's say, for example, that we have a PHP module here, and we've called it delete files PHP. It's designed to pass the user supplied input and calls the Linux system to delete whatever was specified in the input. Hopefully I got my code right. Let me know if I didn't. If I just simply submit this request right here, yeah, anybody tell what it's going to do? I know Andy's raising his hand. I can't. So if I submit this request, I can successfully enumerate everything inside the passwd file, which is all the system users. And this is because that semicolon that's there at the end of the request will actually execute the command that's, or anything after. So I'm concatenating. $20 is a space because we can't do spaces in URLs. And yeah, Wayne Corp's going to have some problems. Okay, another type of code injection attack we have is, we refer to it as HTML injection, which enables us to inject HTML elements into the web app for, again, malicious purpose. And like other forms of injection, we're going to target the input component of the app in order to add to the code that's valid, and it will probably execute if it's not being handled correctly. So let's say that we've got a web page that we're testing, and there's a field there for submitting feedback. The feedback is displayed on the same page after it's or the feedback that people type in gets displayed on that same page after they've submitted it to other users, so they can see it. You know, when you go in, you can see everyone's comments. And we're going to pretend that this field doesn't properly sanitize the input. So it would be vulnerable to an HTML injection. And in the field, we would type in, hey, I need some help. Can anybody help? And then put in our HTML code and with a click here. When this input's submitted and returned to the page, it will include the link in the malicious site or to the malicious site within the comments themselves. And because the web app fails to strip out the HTML tags, they're going to be added to the page. So when a user browses to the page, they're going to see the link, click here to help, and they're going to fall victim to an attack if they click it. So HTML injection is extremely effective when we use it in conjunction with social engineering. And social engineering, if you don't know what that is, I'll send you a link. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Here we go. Okay. I went the wrong way there for a second. Let's now talk about cross-site scripting, or refer to it as XSS. Cross-site scripting is very familiar to HTML injection. That's why I wanted to talk to you about that one first. But includes injecting JavaScript that executes on the client's browser. And if the client browser is unable to tell that the script is trusted, it's going to execute. Malicious JavaScript can actually compromise a client by more than just changing the contents of the page. We can actually steal a cookie. Now I'm getting hungry. Cookie. Okay. It can look at or read sensitive information. We can inject malware so that it can execute, or malware that would execute outside of the browser on your computer or on the client's computer. And now, XSS is extremely popular. It's so popular and effective that most of the web app exploits that we see out there today, or some of the more popular ones, is because we had poor input validation. Now, when it comes to handling cross-site scripting, there's actually 3 different types. We have stored. We also refer to it as a persistent attack. This is where we inject malicious code or links onto the website's form or the database or somewhere within the target. When the user views that malicious code or clicks on that link, the attack is then perpetrated against them. And of course, as its name suggests, the injected code remains on the page as it's stored on the server, so it's persistent. We also have reflective. In a reflective attack, you actually create a form, or you have a form or any type of request that's going to be sent to a legitimate web server. And this request includes your malicious script. You then send a link to the victim with this particular request. See, this is where that social engineering stuff comes into play. And when they click on that link, the malicious script is sent to the legitimate server and reflected off of it. And the script then executes on the victim's browser coming from our malicious site. Now, unlike a stored attack, I bet you can guess what reflective means, right? It's not stored. The code itself is on the reflected attack, and it doesn't persist or doesn't maintain on the server. We also have DOM, or DOM. And here comes my ADD moment. I'm thinking Fast and Furious. Yeah, I don't have a DOM. I don't have a Toretto impersonation for you. Document object model based attacks. These are malicious scripts that are not sent to the server at all. Instead, they take advantage of the web app's client-side implementation of JavaScript to execute the attack solely on the target, or I should say on the client. Need to verify who the target is here. Okay, so let's take a look. This particular piece of snippet here, we're going to say it's we're going to say that it's a server-side pseudocode that's used to display the most recent comment on a web page. Now, this script simply takes the latest comment from the database and includes an HTML page. Now, we're going to assume that the comment prints out, or the comment printed out consists only of text and contains no HTML, or I should say HTML tags, or any type of code. It's actually vulnerable to an XSS attack because the attacker, we could actually submit this particular comment that contains our malicious payload. So what gets returned, or the web server then provides the following HTML code back to the user that visits the website page. And when the page loads into the victim's browser, the attacker's script, that do something evil script, is going to execute. Here's the problem with it, is that most often the victim doesn't even realize that it's happening. And because we don't realize it, it makes it really hard, or you're unable to really prevent this type of an attack. Yeah, I'm really making surfing the web fun today, aren't I? This is why I always tell people, a lot of folks ask me, what can I do to make myself a little bit more secure on the web? And it's not a foolproof way, but the first thing I tell them is make sure you only go to, legitimate sites, not Billy Bob's super site of hacking. I don't know why Billy Bob. I just had to come up with that one. Okay, prevention. There's a simple way to do this. Don't return HTML tags to the client. Now, this also has the added benefit of defending against our previous attack that we talked about, HTML injection. Okay, now some of you may be thinking, Dale, I'd really like to see this happen. So I got a little video. Before we roll the video, though, I want you to understand what I'm doing here. I'm actually going after a virtual machine that is running an extremely vulnerable web app. Yeah, we're going to see what happens here. Okay, so here I am back on my Kali box, and I'm going to just go to our web address for our broken web app, but I'm going to specify a different URL. Whoops. .20, and we'll do our DVWA. And we're taken to the DVWA website. I'm going to type in the username of admin with the password of admin. And this takes us to its main page. And these are just different vulnerabilities that you can test against. Again, I'm going to select the Crosssite stored. And I'm going to come over here and just simply type in Batman is my name. And in the message, I'm going to type in, instead of an actual message, I'm going to do a script. So I'm going to do script. So I'm going to have an alert pop up. And in that alert, I'm going to say, Batman was here. Oh, exclamation point. There we go. And then we're going to do a slash in my script. Okay, when I sign it, it doesn't look like much happened. Oh, look at that. It actually did pop up the first time. So it shows me here that nothing actually took place as far as signing the guest book. But if I've typed that in, anybody that comes along and types in, Robin, hi, everyone, and hits the sign guest book, oh, Batman was here. Now, this doesn't look very damaging right here, but what if this said your password's expired? You need to reset it. Again, our goal in this case is to redirect the user to another site to steal their credentials. Okay, let's get back to the slides. Okay, so again, I know that didn't look like very malicious, but if it said you need to change your password, click here, and I had a URL listed, it would actually, be very, very tricky for us. Or I should say it would be very damaging, it could be. So the question comes into play, Dale, that's great, you've scared us all enough for today, and it's only Thursday. How do we stop all of this? How do we stop it? Well, we got to stop using bad coding practices. We got to first start with making sure that we have training and awareness. In order to keep our web application safe, everybody in the building or within the organization that is in charge or involved with the application itself must be aware of the different security risks with different types of vulnerabilities. And we should provide training for everyone, including not only your developers, but your QA staff, DevOps, sysadmins, anybody that's going to be touching this environment. And I happen to know a great site. I wonder if you guys can think of a great site you could go for training. Pluralsight. Okay, here's another one. I've harped on this one, right? But we need to make sure that we don't trust any user input. We treat all user input as untrusted. And that would include internal or external users. Any user input that's a part of an HTML output introduces risks towards a cross-site script attack. We also have the problem, or we see a lot of a lack of input validation. I mentioned this earlier too. This negligent practice alone is responsible for most of the injection and scripting attacks that we see in the world and that we've talked about today as well. We also got to stop. I come across this one too. Hard coding creds. And there's so many different ways that passwords, if they're hard coded in your app, that we can get this either through SQL injection or cross-site service attacks. We just need to look at it this way. If you have hard-coded creds, someone like me or worse, we're going to find it. So just say no. Okay, the lack of error handling. Again, we talked about this at the beginning as well. Whether it's intentional or not, Some apps have a great amount of information or detail when it comes to the code structure and execution through error messages that get returned to the user. Again, if we could clean up, or if you can clean up your SQL errors to not include things like return back that particular entry doesn't exist in this table, we could actually stop a lot of things from happening. A simple form injection might return. Now, see, I looked at my notes and it was the SQL thing. So I'm not going to look at my notes on that one anymore. Let's go on to the next one. Lack of error handling. Wait a minute, Dale. You just said that we got too much error handling. Now you're saying there's not enough? We cut it back. You said to cut it back. Well, even though revealing too much information in error can be a problem, not handling errors at all is a bigger problem. Because in some examples we've seen the app may not respond gracefully to an unexpected input and could crash the app or corrupt your data. We also have the issue of verbose comments in source code. Ooh, yeah, these are fun. Comments are not meant to be truly hidden from the client. It's just suppressed in the markup page, right? But some developers forget this, and they end up including sensitive data in the comments. There's so many examples out there, especially in GitHub. Things like sensitive information could be in the comments, server-side functionality, snippets of old code, other information that can help you identify or help me or attackers identify your weaknesses. Identify the weaknesses. I should do it this way. I don't have any lasers. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Again, I appreciate everyone taking their time. Hopefully I didn't bore you. And you can tell, those of you who follow my courses, I didn't upgrade any jokes. I'm still on version 1.
That's not entirely true. The Robert Pattinson one's new.
Oh, that's true. That is true.
That's how you know I'm paying attention to your content. I watch the intros every time.
You haven't fallen asleep during them. You've seen them so many times. You
Yeah.
could probably stand up for me.
Yeah. So we had one question came in that to ask you. So you talked a little bit about filtering stuff. Sorry, say that again.
I'm married.
Oh, yeah. Well,
That's
that wasn't it. I'm sorry. Sorry to tell you. So we had so filtering stuff received from an untrusted source, but what sources would you consider trusted is one of the questions we have.
I would only trust, the sources I would trust would be like those whitelists that we've talked about. Anything that we've hard coded and that we've reviewed. Again, the point here is that because we don't know what people are going to, sometimes it's by mistake. People type in weird things, or, you go to an input field and you rest your elbow on the keyboard and something happens. But a lot of times that doesn't happen all that often, but it can create issues for us. So again, if it's something we don't control, it's untrusted. That's how I would phrase it. Anything else you can trust. So again, whitelists would be my biggest one.
So I have a question. So this one, here's another one that just came in. So what are alternatives to hard-coded credentials? Where should those be stored?
You're going to want to make...
this one's tough.
See,
I've asked lots of people this question. I always get different answers too, so I'm curious what you have to say, or if you have if you have an answer.
Yeah, you know what? Off the top of my head, you got me. I'm trying to think of a great example, because I know that, I guess I would go back and ask, especially in engagement, I'd be like, why does it have to be hard coded? Why can't it be a call? Why aren't we calling it from another source? I don't know. Yeah. What have you heard? That's a great, maybe I can learn something today.
So that's one of the places that we talk about is, so a lot of people use either some credential manager and then they call out to the API to get stuff. So that's probably the best one I've heard. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to move all of our content over to use a solution here internally called Keep. And so we're kind of trying to do something similar to that.
How do you spell that? Keep? Let me write that down.
Keep, yeah, KEEP. It's I forget who makes it, but yeah. I'm sure somebody's screaming like, "Oh, it's made by this company." Mike Richards, I'm sure, is on the call saying, "Yeah, a
I
vault
was just
is
doing.
it? Yeah, keep. What's
I,
that?
I was just doing my reconnaissance with you.
Yeah, it's
Cerner
okay.
user.
At least we didn't let you in the building, so that was step one. Um, yeah, but yeah, a vault. Somebody commented and said a vault would be the best answer, which is what we're trying to do with Keep.
Yeah.
So I had a question around. So we're working through a project right now for deprecating out old TLS configuration. So TLS 1.0 and 1.1 are really no longer good standards to be on. But how susceptible do you see companies or places that you're looking at that still have TLS 1.0 and 1.1 enabled, or bad ciphers effectively, or easily crackable ciphers?
I hear a lot of organizations trying to do the same move that you guys are doing. There's still the problem is that there's so many organizations. We all know that there's a shortage in the tech field right now, and there's so many companies out there that can't keep up, that it's still being utilized. And on top of that, sometimes it's being utilized in a framework that no one's keeping track of. And so even though they may patch, they may upgrade certain systems, they forget other systems. So be very vigilant with whichever direction you guys are heading, and making sure that every system is utilizing the newer one. But yeah, we see it.
Right.
The 1.0, I'm still shocked that I see it today. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
It's like, why web? We're at it.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that, because like our biggest, the most difficult thing we have is all our downstream clients that are engaging to handshake at TLS 1.0 or 1.1. That's what we have to go focus on getting upgraded before we can upgrade ourselves. And so there's just a lot of that. So another question I have is, so what are your thoughts on how uninformed people respond to issues? For example, the Arkansas governor accusing a developer of illegally hacking when he escalated a state unemployment website issue exposing data to misconfigurations. So effectively, like, I don't know if this is in the black hat or gray hat area. I can't tell if he did something malicious or he just was. But what are your thoughts on that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, Andy, you probably have heard me say this before. Just because you can doesn't mean you can. That's how I look at things. I see there was another gentleman that was down in Florida that hacked the elections, the local elections. I want to say the district, and posted it on YouTube. And
oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I saw that.
Yeah, and he got arrested and served some time. Actually, I don't think he served time. I think he's on probation. But first of all, politicians, I don't know how much I believe anyway, as far as who to blame. But yeah, we should never, you always have to have permission to do anything, even if it's your network. Somebody in authority needs to give you permission, and we refer to it as the scope. So you say, I'm going to go after this particular app, even though you're going at that app or that particular infrastructure, and you see this little branch off to the side, you're like, ooh, I want to go there. You can't go there. You've got to make sure you have permission. We call it the get out of jail for free card. You've got to have that for each scope. So that's how I personally feel. There's a lot of stuff. Sorry, I'm going to get off my ADD moments. I do a lot of traveling, and there's a lot of Wi-Fi networks and hotels and airplanes that I get on, and I'm like, oh, I could, but I don't, because I don't have permission. I can, but I can't. Or I can. I can, but yeah. Just because you can, you can.
Yeah, so and I have a question for you. So, have you paid attention to the coal fire, the pen testers that got arrested in Iowa? Do you know anything about that?
I haven't heard about that one yet.
Okay, I'll have to send that to you. What's that? You've been
I've
hearing the
been here
back
in the
kick.
back.
So this happened probably late last year. I'll
Oh,
send you something afterwards. You can go read about it. I was curious if you'd heard anything about that one. They did. Do you listen to Darknet Diaries at all? Do you know what Darknet Diaries is?
yes, absolutely love. If anybody out there, and you don't have to be in security, um, he is extremely entertaining in telling stories and explaining things as far as some of the biggest breaches in history. So yeah, I'm very much
Yeah,
familiar with it.
yeah.
Jack Pipes.
Yeah, Jack. One of his more recent episodes. So you may not be all the way up to date. It has an episode about I'm looking over here to see. It's probably 2 or 3 or maybe 4 episodes ago. I'll send you something about it. You might find it interesting, and then I'm curious to hear what you think about it. So. But it's some pen testers that got arrested even though they were within scope. But it's a good
I
story for
did,
sure.
I did hear
Oh,
that where the
you do know? Okay, okay. In
sheriff
Iowa,
department got involved, and
yeah. Hmm.
yeah, yeah, that was
Has
crazy.
has anything ever like that happened to you in any of your penetration testing experience or anything you've ever done from an ethical hacking perspective?
I've been blessed that I've had question. How do I say this? I've been questioned heavily,
Yeah,
but I've always had that get out of jail card, and I always make sure I stay within my scope. And there's been some. I mean, hearing that story, the guy tell the story, I'm like, yep, been there. I once did this engagement with a bank, and I walked in with a Blade server, pretending like I was their IT guy
yeah,
to install their new faster system. And I went in, and man, I mean, a bank. I mean, I'm talking. I mean, that's federal. Whatever you're going to be doing there.
yeah,
And yeah, by the way, I did have permission. I didn't just do this out of the blue, but yeah, the adrenaline shoots off like crazy. You sweat. I mean, you have to be calm and cool under pressure. But yeah, I've had a couple situations where nothing as drastic as that. I've always been able to, here's your contact that you need to contact. Hey, good job, you caught me. Yay! Here, call this guy. So
yeah.
it's
Okay.
it's a little bit more serious today because people understand breaches and security, and companies are taking a lot more. I haven't had one in a couple of years now. So but like I said, even to what you see with Coalfire and what happened with them, man, they really went at them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was the end of our questions. So I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to share at all before we close out.
Um, I
You
can
don't
do
have
this.
to.
No, I don't. I don't have anything else.
It's too bad you
Uh,
can't hear all the. So I've had numerous people messaging me throughout saying this guy is great. This guy is really fun to
oh,
listen to. So it's too bad you can't hear. Like some people like sent me messages like I'm actually laughing about this, but he can't hear me. I've had a couple people message me that right now. So it's too bad you
you,
haven't
you
heard
know.
that feedback.
So I will thank you for those of you guys that sent out that feedback, because I'm a big, huge believer in learning and emotion. If you laugh while you're learning something, you will retain it longer than just listening to information because there's an emotion attached to it. So that's kind of my goal with my presentation style, and I appreciate that. Of course, you can hear more and better jokes on Pluralsight. That's my plug-in there for my courses.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone I told I was like he probably just gets used to this because he always presents just to himself in his room by himself. So
And my wife rolls her eyes quite a bit when I'm cracking jokes too. So
okay. All right. Yeah. So with that, that's all we have. So we're going to send out a feedback, or sorry, a survey for some feedback for people, just so we can get some thoughts, and then we'll get the recording posted online here in a couple weeks. So, but thank you
hey,
very
it was
much,
nice.
Dale. I appreciate your time today. Yeah. Thanks, Dale.